Have you ever wondered what happens when the person who's supposed to protect your family becomes its biggest threat? When my father lay dying in a hospital bed, my stepmother Margaret blocked me from saying goodbye, claiming only immediate family was allowed in. 1 week later, at his will reading, she stood at the door of a glass conference room with 12 witnesses watching and announced I wasn't welcome because this meeting is only for heirs named in the will. The smirk on her face said she'd won everything: my father's $3.2 million estate, his business legacy, and the power to erase me completely. But what Margaret didn't know was that my father had prepared for this moment 2 years earlier, leaving me something that would expose her deception to everyone in that room. Before we continue, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story truly resonates with you. I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. My name is Olivia Davidson, 32 years old, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the quietest response carries the most power. Growing up, I never measured success the way Margaret and her children did. While my stepbrother Bradley climbed the investment banking ladder, pulling in $400,000 a year by age 28, I chose to become an art therapist. My annual salary of $45,000 barely covered my studio apartment in Queens, but every day I helped traumatized children express what words couldn't capture. Margaret never missed an opportunity to remind me of this failure. At family dinners, she'd gesture around their Westchester mansion and say, "This is what real careers build, Olivia. Your father worked himself to the bone so you could play with crayons?" My father, Robert Davidson, saw it differently. He'd built his logistics company from nothing into a multi-million-dollar operation, but he understood value beyond numbers. Some investments mature in hearts, not portfolios, he'd tell me privately after Margaret's lectures. What you do for those kids matters more than Bradley's derivatives ever will. But Margaret had already begun her campaign to position me as the family disappointment. The contrast became sharper at every gathering. Jessica, Margaret's daughter, worked at her mother's marketing firm, a senior consultant position created specifically for her. She'd never landed a single client independently, but Margaret praised her business acumen constantly. Meanwhile, my work with survivors of abuse was dismissed as noble but impractical. Margaret once introduced me to her country club friends as Robert's daughter who does crafts with children. Isn't that sweet? What hurt most wasn't the dismissal of my career, but watching my father grow quieter at these moments. He'd squeeze my hand under the table, a silent apology for not confronting his wife publicly. I didn't know then that he was documenting every slight, every deliberate exclusion, building a case that would matter when I needed it most. Thanksgiving 6 months before my father died should have been a celebration. Instead, it became the night I realized how orchestrated Margaret's cruelty had become. She'd forgotten to prepare anything vegetarian, despite my dietary choices being the same for 5 years. "Oh, Olivia, I completely spaced. But there's salad," she said, gesturing to a bowl of iceberg lettuce while Bradley carved the turkey. Jessica spent the entire dinner describing her latest achievement, a promotion to Vice President of Strategic Initiatives. "Mom says I'm the youngest VP in company history," she beamed, failing to mention the company had exactly 3 employees. Bradley nodded approvingly while discussing his latest deal. $2 million in commission this quarter alone. That's what I call a real Thanksgiving blessing." My father sat at the head of the table, his face notably pale, a persistent cough interrupting his attempts to eat. When I expressed concern, Margaret waved dismissively. "Your father's just been working too hard. Unlike some people, he understands responsibility." The dig was clear. My choice to work with traumatized children rather than chase money was seen as irresponsible. Then something unexpected happened. During dessert, my father set down his fork and looked directly at me. "Olivia, I need you to meet with Morrison next week, Tuesday, 2 o'clock. Morrison was his attorney for 20 years. Margaret's face tightened. Why would she need to see James? My father's response was calm but firm. "Some investments are worth more than money, Bradley, And some things need to be documented properly. The table went silent. Jessica nervously checked her phone. Bradley exchanged glances with his mother. Margaret's smile became fixed, artificial. Well, whatever you think is best, darling. But her eyes, when they met mine, were cold, calculating. That night, I didn't know my father had already been diagnosed with stage 3 cancer. The prescription bottles in the trash changed everything. I'd stopped by my father's house to return a book when I noticed them. Powerful painkillers, oncology medications, drugs I recognized from my work with terminally ill children. When I confronted Margaret, her performance was flawless. Your father didn't want to worry you. It's just preventive care, some tests. You know how doctors overreact these days. But Bradley knew. He let it slip during a phone call I overheard. Mom said not to worry her about Dad's treatments. She's too emotional to handle it properly. Too emotional. The woman who'd held crying children through chemotherapy was apparently too fragile to know her father was fighting cancer. I called my father's physician directly. I'm sorry, Ms. Davidson, but I can only discuss your father's condition with authorized family members. The receptionist's tone was apologetic but firm. Mrs. Margaret Davidson is listed as his primary contact and medical proxy. When had that happened? My father had always been meticulous about keeping me informed of important decisions. The pieces fell into place slowly. Margaret scheduling all his appointments for times when I was working. The family meetings I mysteriously wasn't invited to because they were just about finances. The way she'd started answering his phone, screening his calls. Your father needs rest, not visitors, she'd say when I tried to stop by. 3 weeks after that Thanksgiving, I discovered the truth through my father's assistant, who whispered it during a chance encounter at a coffee shop. Stage 3 pancreatic cancer, diagnosed 4 months ago. I thought you knew. 4 months. While I'd been deliberately kept in the dark, Margaret had been making preparations. The call that would come at 2 a.m. 3 weeks later shouldn't have been a surprise, but somehow it still destroyed me. The phone rang at 2:47 a.m., jolting me from restless sleep. Ms. Davidson, this is St. Mary's Hospital. Your father has been admitted in critical condition. You should come immediately. I threw on clothes, my hands shaking as I grabbed my keys. The 45-minute drive felt like hours, every red light an eternity while my father lay dying without me. The ICU's fluorescent lights were harsh, unforgiving. I could see him through the glass, tubes, machines, the rhythmic beep of monitors. But when I tried to enter, a nurse blocked my path. I'm sorry, but you're not on the approved visitor list. My legs nearly buckled. That's my father. I'm his daughter. His actual daughter. The nurse consulted her tablet, sympathy flickering across her face. Mrs. Margaret Davidson specified immediate family only, herself and her 2 children, Bradley and Jessica. Through the window, I watched Margaret sitting beside my father's bed, holding his hand, playing the devoted wife while his biological daughter stood helpless in the hallway. He keeps calling for someone, the nurse whispered, glancing around nervously. Olivia, is that you? My heart shattered. Even sedated, even dying, my father was calling for me. But Margaret had built her wall perfectly. Hospital security stood nearby, ready to enforce the visitor restrictions. I pressed my palm against the glass, watching the machines breathe for him. Margaret looked up, our eyes meeting through the barrier. She didn't smirk or gloat. She simply turned back to my father, stroking his hair as if I didn't exist. The heart monitor's rhythm grew irregular. Alarms began sounding. Medical staff rushed in, pushing Margaret aside. At 3:15 a.m., the alarms went silent. The doctor emerged, his face grave. My father was gone, and I never got to say goodbye. Time of death, 3:15 a.m., the doctor announced to the hallway. Margaret emerged from the room, tears perfectly timed, and collapsed into Bradley's arms. He's gone. Your father is gone. Jessica filmed her mother's grief, already crafting the narrative for social media. Not one of them looked at me standing 10 feet away. My father's actual daughter, forbidden from his final moments. I tried once more to enter the room. Please, I just need to see him. Just for a moment. Margaret's tears stopped instantly. Security! This woman is disrupting our family's grief. Please escort her out. The guard approached apologetically. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. That's my father. The words came out broken, desperate. Margaret's voice cut through cold and clear. Your father made his wishes clear about who he wanted with him. Respect his final moments with his real family. Real family. As if 28 years of being his daughter meant nothing. The security guard guided me toward the elevator. Behind us, I heard Margaret instructing the nurse. No one else is to see him. We need privacy to grieve. But as the elevator doors began closing, a different nurse, the one who'd whispered to me earlier, slipped something into my hand. It was my father's handkerchief, the one with his initials that he always carried. He was holding this, she said quietly. Keep it. That small act of kindness broke me. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot until dawn, clutching that handkerchief, breathing in the faint scent of his cologne. Margaret had stolen his last words, his final breath, his goodbye. But she couldn't steal the 28 years of love that came before, though God knows she would try. 300 people attended my father's funeral, filling Riverside Memorial Chapel to capacity. Margaret had orchestrated every detail to erase me from his life story. The slideshow running on loop showed Robert Davidson with his loving family. Hundreds of photos of Margaret, Bradley, and Jessica. Not a single image included me. 28 years deleted in a PowerPoint presentation. She'd seated me in the third row, behind business associates and casual acquaintances. When I tried to move to the family section, an usher stopped me. Mrs. Davidson arranged the seating personally. I watched Bradley deliver a eulogy about the man who became my real father, while Margaret dabbed her eyes with precision timing. Jessica read a poem about blended families and chosen love. No one asked his biological daughter to speak. When I stood to approach the microphone anyway, Margaret signaled to the funeral director, who smoothly announced a musical interlude. The rejection was public, deliberate, witnessed by everyone who'd known my father. Some looked away embarrassed, others whispered among themselves. But then James Morrison appeared at my elbow. My father's attorney for 2 decades leaned close enough to whisper, "Your father left specific instructions. Meet me after the service, privately." He pressed a business card into my hand, then moved away before Margaret noticed. The burial was worse. Margaret had listed herself and her children as the only family on the funeral program. She stood graveside accepting condolences as the grieving widow, while I was pushed to the periphery with distant cousins and employees. But I noticed something. Morrison was photographing everything, documenting who stood where, who spoke to whom. As dirt fell on my father's casket, Margaret finally looked at me directly. The mask slipped for just a moment, revealing pure triumph. She thought she'd won everything. If you've ever been excluded from your own family, or made to feel invisible by people who should protect you, you know exactly how I felt standing at my father's grave. But sometimes, the people we lose have one final way to protect us. Before we continue, please hit that subscribe button if this story resonates with you, and comment below. Have you ever had to stand up to family who tried to erase you? Morrison's call came exactly 1 week after the funeral. The will reading is scheduled for Thursday at 2 p.m. Your presence is requested. I could hear Margaret's voice in the background. She doesn't need to be there, James. Only beneficiaries are required to attend. His response was professionally neutral. I'll notify all relevant parties. Margaret called me an hour later, her voice dripping false concern. Olivia, dear, I wanted to spare you more pain. Your father's will is straightforward. Everything goes to his wife and family. Coming Thursday would just be awkward. The word hung between us like a threat. "I'll be there," I said simply. "Check for yourself if you don't believe me. Your name isn't in it." "I said I'll be there, Margaret." Her tone sharpened. "You'll embarrass yourself, in front of lawyers, witnesses, everyone. Your father made his choice clear." Then softer, almost pitying. "I'm trying to protect you from more hurt." That evening, a separate email arrived from Morrison, encrypted and marked confidential. "Ms. Davidson, please bring any documents your father may have given you. Any papers, recordings, or materials dated within the last 5 years. This is important." The specificity was intriguing. Documents my father gave me. Not left for me, not about me, gave to me directly. I thought about the meeting my father had mentioned at Thanksgiving, the one Margaret had questioned. Tuesday at 2 o'clock with Morrison, but my father died before that meeting could happen. Or had he planned something else entirely? Margaret texted Bradley and Jessica that night. I know because Jessica posted about it, unable to resist social media even now. "Family meeting tomorrow. Big changes coming. Hat blessed. Family first." The vultures were circling, confident in their feast. My father's home office had been locked since his death, but I still had my childhood key. Margaret didn't know about the hidden safe behind his bookshelf, the one he'd shown me on my 16th birthday. "Some things are just between us, sweetheart," he'd said, teaching me the combination. My mother's birthday, the woman who'd died when I was 4. Inside the safe, among birth certificates and old photos, was a navy blue folder I'd never seen before. A post-it note in my father's handwriting read, "For Olivia, when the time comes." My hands trembled as I opened it. Legal documents, notarized and dated 2 years ago. A USB drive taped to the inside cover. The header on the papers made my breath catch. "Davidson Family Trust Amendment. 2 years ago." Before the cancer diagnosis, before Margaret's escalation, my father had been preparing. The documents were dense with legal language, but certain phrases stood out. Irrevocable trust, designated trustee, in the event of deliberate exclusion or isolation. He'd known. Somehow, he'd known what Margaret would do. The USB drive felt heavier than its mere ounces. I wanted to check its contents immediately, but something made me wait. These documents were meant for a specific moment, a particular audience. My father had been a strategic man. This was his final strategy. I placed everything back in the Navy folder, noting the embossed seal of Morrison and Associates on every page. Carol Bennett's notary stamp appeared multiple times. She'd be at the reading tomorrow as Morrison's senior notary. My father hadn't just prepared documents, he'd built a case with witnesses. That night I chose my outfit carefully. The blazer my father had given me for my birthday, the watch he'd worn every day until the hospital. If Margaret wanted to erase me, I'd walk in wearing his memory. Margaret gathered her children the morning of the will reading like a general preparing for victory. I know because Bradley posted a photo from their breakfast at the country club. "Family strategy session," he captioned it before quickly deleting. But screenshots live forever, and my cousin Sarah caught it in time. "Olivia might try to cause a scene," Margaret told them, according to Jessica's livestream that she thought was private. "She has no legal standing, but desperation makes people unpredictable." Jessica laughed, that hollow sound she'd perfected. "She actually thinks Dad left her something? After she chose finger painting over family?" Bradley was more pragmatic. "The will is ironclad. I reviewed it myself last month." Last month. My father had been dead for only a week, but Bradley had already reviewed the will while he was dying. "She can contest all she wants. It'll cost her more than she makes in 5 years." Margaret wore her power like armor that morning, a black Chanel suit that cost more than my monthly rent, the diamond necklace my father gave her for their 5th anniversary, the wedding ring she'd upgraded twice. "After today," she announced, "we can finally move forward without distractions." Jessica posted another story. "Big day, justice for those who really loved him." I dressed in my father's favorite color, navy blue. the same shade as the folder in my bag. I'd learned something from Margaret over the years. Power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's as quiet as a notarized document, as subtle as a recording device, as patient as a trust amendment waiting 2 years for its moment. The drive to Morrison and Associates felt like approaching a battlefield, but I had something Margaret didn't expect. My father's voice, captured in digital clarity, explaining everything. Morrison and Associates occupied the entire 15th floor of a Manhattan high-rise, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of Central Park. The conference room Margaret had chosen was deliberately intimidating, glass walls ensuring everyone in the office could witness what she assumed would be my humiliation. 12 people had already gathered inside: Morrison, 2 associate lawyers, Carol Bennett and another notary, Margaret's personal attorney, 2 witnesses from my father's company, and of course, Margaret's family holding court at the mahogany table. Security cameras recorded from multiple angles. Morrison's firm took documentation seriously. The conference room's acoustics carried voices clearly. Every word would be captured, transcribed, part of the permanent record. Margaret had chosen this fishbowl setting to make my exclusion as public as possible. She didn't realize she'd created the perfect theater for truth. Carol Bennett looked up as I approached, and something flickered across her face. Recognition, maybe even relief. She'd been with Morrison's firm for 15 years, had notarized hundreds of my father's documents. Today she held 2 separate folders on the table before her, not one. 2. Morrison himself sat at the head of the table, his expression professionally neutral but his eyes alert. He'd worn his courtroom suit, I noticed, the charcoal gray he reserved for his most important cases. A legal pad lay before him, already filled with notes in his precise handwriting. Whatever was about to happen, he'd prepared extensively. Margaret held court at the opposite end, flanked by Bradley and Jessica like corporate bodyguards. She'd positioned herself as the meeting's focal point, the grieving widow ready to receive her due. The death certificate lay prominently displayed before her, a prop in her performance. The stage was set, the audience assembled. The only thing missing was the truth my father had left in a navy blue folder. I was 3 feet from the conference room door when Margaret rose from her chair, moving with practiced precision to block my entry. Through the glass walls, 12 pairs of eyes watched our confrontation like a corporate theater performance. She didn't lower her voice. She wanted everyone to hear. "Olivia, this is awkward, but this meeting is for heirs only." She emphasized the last word, letting it hang in the air like a verdict. "Your father's will names specific beneficiaries. You're not among them." Behind her, Bradley smirked while Jessica raised her phone, recording everything for her social media narrative. I stood perfectly still, meeting her gaze without flinching. The navy folder rested in my bag, patient as a sleeping dragon. "I was invited by Mr. Morrison," I said calmly. "A formality. James probably felt bad for you." Margaret's voice carried perfectly through the glass walls. "But legal proceedings aren't about feelings. They're about facts. And the fact is, your father made his choice." The office had gone quiet. Assistants at nearby desks pretended to work while obviously listening. 2 partners from Morrison's firm had stopped their hallway conversation to observe. This was what Margaret wanted: maximum witnesses to my supposed humiliation. "I'm sorry you came all this way for nothing," she continued, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Perhaps you should have focused more on being a real daughter instead of playing with troubled children. Your father valued success, Olivia, not hobbies." Morrison stood up inside the conference room, his movement drawing everyone's attention. Carol Bennett was already reaching for her second folder. But I didn't react, didn't argue, didn't give Margaret the emotional response she craved. Instead, I simply reached into my bag and withdrew the navy folder my father had left for this exact moment. Margaret's performance escalated when she saw I wasn't leaving. "Everyone, I apologize for this disruption," she announced to the room, her voice carrying through the glass. "Olivia has always had difficulty accepting reality. Her father tried to tell her, Success isn't measured in finger paintings and feel-good sessions. It's measured in real accomplishments, real contributions to a legacy. Bradley joined in, his investment banker voice cutting through. This is a business matter, Olivia, not a charity case. Dad understood that, even if you never did. The dad stung. My father reduced to his claim. Your little art projects, Margaret continued. They're sweet, really, but they won't pay for lawyers when you try to contest this will. And you will try, won't you? Because you've never understood that love doesn't automatically mean money. Several people in the office had stopped pretending to work, openly watching now. Jessica added her contribution. Some of us built real futures, while others played with crayons. Guess which one Daddy respected? She emphasized Daddy like twisting a knife, claiming an intimacy with my father that had never existed. The witnesses inside the conference room shifted uncomfortably. One of my father's longtime employees looked away. Morrison's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. But I remained silent, letting Margaret's cruelty fill the space, letting everyone hear exactly who she was. Robert knew who deserved his legacy, Margaret declared, her finale approaching. He knew who truly stood by him, who understood his values, who built something meaningful with their lives. And sweetheart, she leaned closer. It wasn't the girl who chose welfare work over wealth. That's when I pulled out the Navy folder completely, holding it where everyone could see. Mr. Morrison, I said clearly, my voice cutting through her monologue, I have something for you. The Navy folder felt weightless in my hands as I stepped past Margaret, who stood frozen in the doorway. Morrison was already moving toward me, his expression shifting from professional neutrality to something sharper. Anticipation. Ms. Davidson, he said formally, loud enough for everyone to hear. I've been waiting for this. Margaret's composure cracked. What is that? What are you talking about? Her voice pitched higher, the controlled widow persona slipping. Behind her, Bradley stood up, his confidence wavering. Jessica lowered her phone, suddenly uncertain about what she was recording. I handed Morrison the folder with steady hands, though my heart hammered against my ribs. He accepted it with the gravity of someone receiving evidence in court. This was delivered to my office 2 years ago, Morrison announced to the room, with very specific instructions about when and how it should be presented. That's impossible, Margaret said, but her voice had lost its commanding tone. I know everything about Robert's dealings with you. I was his wife. I handled his affairs. Carol Bennett stepped forward, her second folder now open. Not everything, Mrs. Davidson. Some documents were executed privately, as was Mr. Davidson's right. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Margaret's personal attorney leaned forward, suddenly alert. Morrison opened the Navy folder slowly, deliberately, letting the moment build. The office beyond the glass walls had gone completely silent, assistants, partners, everyone watching this reversal unfold. Before we proceed with the will reading, he said, there's the matter of the Davidson Family Trust Amendment to address. Margaret's face drained of color. What trust amendment? There's no trust. Everything was in the will. But her voice shook now, the certainty crumbling. Bradley and Jessica exchanged panicked glances. The power dynamic in the room had shifted completely in 30 seconds. Morrison lifted the documents from the folder with the reverence of handling historical artifacts. The notary seals caught the light, official and undeniable. The Davidson Family Trust Amendment, he read aloud. Executed January 15th, 2 years ago, properly witnessed and notarized by Carol Bennett of this firm. Every word fell like a hammer strike in the silent room. Margaret's hands gripped the conference table. That's impossible. I would have known. I handled all of Robert's legal matters. Her personal attorney was frantically flipping through his copies of documents, finding nothing about any trust. Not all of them, Mrs. Davidson, Carol Bennett stated firmly. I notarized this myself in this very building with Mr. Davidson present and of completely sound mind. He was quite specific about the circumstances under which this should be revealed. The document's header was visible to everyone as Morrison held it up. Irrevocable amendment to the Davidson Family Trust. The date stamp, the notary seal, the witness signatures, all legitimate, all binding. 2 years of Margaret's scheming, undone by papers she never knew existed. There's also a video, Morrison continued, pulling the USB drive from the folder. Mr. Davidson wanted to ensure his intentions were crystal clear. He inserted the drive into the conference room system, the large screen on the wall flickering to life. Margaret stood abruptly. "This is fraud. I'll sue every one of you. That man wasn't of sound mind. He had cancer." But her protest sounded desperate now, the controlled facade completely shattered. Bradley grabbed his phone, likely texting their lawyer. Jessica had gone pale, her social media bravado evaporating. "Shall we watch what Mr. Davidson had to say?" Morrison asked the room. It wasn't really a question. The truth was about to speak for itself. Morrison's voice filled the conference room as he read from the trust amendment, each word precise and legally binding. The Davidson Family Trust, established 1995, is hereby amended to name Olivia Marie Davidson as primary trustee, with full fiduciary responsibility over all trust assets, currently valued at $3.2 million. Margaret's legs gave out. She sank into a chair as Morrison continued. In accordance with the prenuptial agreement signed by Margaret Stevens Davidson, dated 8 years ago, Mrs. Davidson is entitled to a one-time payment of $250,000 upon the death of Robert Davidson. This satisfies all marital claims to the estate. Bradley Stevens and Jessica Stevens, Morrison read on, are each allocated $50,000 for educational expenses to be administered by the primary trustee. Bradley's face went from red to white. Jessica started crying, not for grief, but for her evaporated millions. The room was absolutely silent except for Morrison's voice. The remaining trust assets are to be used to establish the Robert Davidson Foundation for Art Therapy Services, supporting children who have experienced trauma. The foundation will be administered by Olivia Davidson, who will receive an annual salary as director, commensurate with industry standards. Furthermore, Morrison paused, letting the weight build. This amendment was executed 2 years prior to Mr. Davidson's death, when he was fully competent and under no duress. It specifically states, in the event of attempts to exclude Olivia from family matters, medical decisions, or estate proceedings, Margaret Davidson forfeits all fiduciary rights and any claims beyond the prenuptial agreement. Margaret's attorney finally spoke. This appears to be legally binding. His loyalty to his client couldn't override legal reality. The witnesses from my father's company were nodding. They recognized his signature, his way of thinking. This was exactly how Robert Davidson would protect his daughter. My father appeared on the screen, healthy and strong, sitting in this very conference room 2 years ago. His voice, which I'd feared I'd never hear again, filled the space with quiet authority. If you're watching this, then Margaret has done exactly what I've come to expect. She's tried to erase my daughter from my legacy. Tears ran down my face silently as he continued. I'm recording this of sound mind and body, before any illness, before any diagnosis. I see how Margaret treats Olivia. I see the systematic exclusion, the belittling, the attempts to diminish her worth because she chose compassion over commerce. He looked directly at the camera, as if seeing through time. Olivia, your work with traumatized children is worth more than any deal Bradley ever closed, more than any fabricated position Jessica holds. You save lives with art, with patience, with love. That's a legacy money can't buy. Then his tone hardened. Margaret, I know about the separate bank accounts you think I haven't discovered. I know about your promises to your children about their inheritance. I've recorded our conversations, yes, multiple ones, where you discussed keeping Olivia away once I'm gone. Margaret made a strangled sound. My father continued, Every manipulation, every cruel comment, every attempt to isolate my daughter has been documented. The hospital will be very interested in how you managed to alter my medical proxy forms without my consent. The forged signature is quite obvious when compared to authentic samples. The video had 30 seconds left. Olivia, sweetheart, I'm sorry I couldn't protect you more openly while I lived. But I could protect your future. Use this trust to help other children heal, the way you helped them while I watched with pride. You are, and always have been, my greatest achievement. Margaret shot to her feet, her desperation unleashing. This is forged! He was manipulated! Olivia must have drugged him, confused him. Her accusations flew wild and baseless. I'll contest every word. My attorneys will tear this apart. But her personal attorney was already packing his briefcase, distancing himself from a lost cause. Morrison pulled out another folder, this one thick with evidence. Mrs. Davidson, would you like to explain these bank statements showing systematic transfers from Mr. Davidson's accounts to your private holdings? Or these emails between you and Bradley discussing, and I quote, keeping Olivia away from any financial decisions? Bradley tried to stand, but Morrison wasn't finished. Mr. Stevens, we also have your text messages to your mother about making sure the art therapist gets nothing. Particularly interesting since you were never legally adopted by Mr. Davidson, despite your use of Dad at every opportunity. Jessica was frantically deleting her social media posts, but Morrison addressed her too. Ms. Stevens, your live streams from this morning have been preserved, the ones where you discussed finally getting what we deserve and justice for those who really loved him. Very illuminating about your motivations. Carol Bennett added the final blow. There's also the matter of the hospital forms. The medical proxy changes that occurred while Mr. Davidson was sedated. The handwriting analysis shows clear forgery. The hospital board is very interested in how a dying man's daughter was prevented from saying goodbye. Margaret's mask finally shattered completely. You can't prove anything. Robert wanted this. He told me Olivia was a disappointment. But everyone in the room had just heard my father's voice saying the opposite. Her lies crumbled against recorded truth. I believe, Morrison said calmly, the district attorney will be very interested in these documents. Morrison stood at the head of the table, his authority filling the room. By the power vested in me as executor of Robert Davidson's estate and legal representative of the Davidson Family Trust, I hereby recognize Olivia Marie Davidson as the rightful primary trustee, effective immediately. The words rang with finality. All associated bank accounts will be frozen pending audit, he continued. Mrs. Davidson, you have 30 days to vacate the family residence, which is held in trust. Your personal belongings will be returned to you. The house remains part of the trust assets. Margaret slumped in her chair, defeated. 8 years of manipulation dissolved in minutes. Bradley Stevens and Jessica Stevens, your educational allowances will be available upon submission of legitimate enrollment documents to Ms. Davidson. Neither could meet my eyes. Their social media empires and fabricated success stories meant nothing now. The witnesses from my father's company began approaching me, offering condolences they'd been prevented from expressing before. Your father talked about you constantly, one said. He kept every article about your therapy center, every photo of the children you helped. The family friends Margaret had kept away started revealing themselves, admitting they'd never believed her stories. Margaret's attorney formally withdrew representation. This is beyond my scope, he stated, leaving quickly. Her isolation was complete. The same isolation she'd forced on me, returned threefold. Bradley and Jessica sat frozen, their mother's promises of millions evaporated, their futures suddenly uncertain. I hadn't smiled once through the entire revelation. This wasn't about revenge or satisfaction. This was about justice, delivered quietly and professionally, exactly as my father would have wanted. The power Margaret had wielded through manipulation and cruelty had been replaced by something stronger, truth, documented and undeniable. The trust administration begins immediately, Morrison announced. Meeting adjourned. Justice doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it arrives quietly in a Navy folder, prepared by someone who loved you enough to protect you even after they're gone. If this story of standing firm in your truth resonates with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear that patience and dignity can triumph over manipulation. What would you have done in my position? Let me know in the comments below. I signed the trustee documents right there in the conference room, my hand steady despite the earthquake of emotions inside me. My first act wasn't revenge. It was revelation of my father's true vision. The Robert Davidson Foundation for Art Therapy Services will be established immediately, I announced. $2 million will fund programs for traumatized children across the state. The center where I work will receive $500,000 to expand services, I continued, watching Margaret flinch at every dollar designated for healing instead of her accounts. $700,000 will remain for operational costs and trust management. The numbers were precise, thoughtful. I'd learned strategy from my father, too. Then I did something that made everyone pause. Bradley and Jessica, your educational funds remain available. $50,000 each as designated. I won't punish you for your mother's choices. Bradley's mouth opened in shock. Jessica started crying again, but differently, shame mixed with relief. That's more than we deserve, Bradley admitted quietly. The first honest words I'd heard from him in years. The arrogance had drained away, leaving someone very young and lost. Jessica nodded, unable to speak. They'd expected vengeance. I gave them mercy. Margaret looked up at me with something like fear. What about me? Her voice was small, stripped of all pretense. The prenuptial amount is yours, I said simply. $250,000, what you agreed to 8 years ago. No more, no less. Justice, not cruelty. Morrison nodded approvingly. Your father would be proud. He believed in building up, not tearing down. The room felt lighter somehow, as if my father's spirit had witnessed his final wishes fulfilled. The foundation would help thousands of children heal through art. That was his true legacy, not money, but healing multiplied across generations. Security arrived within minutes to escort Margaret from the building. Her credit cards linked to the trust were deactivated while she stood in the lobby. The Lexus she'd driven, registered to the trust, required immediate return. She stood on Park Avenue, designer suit wrinkled, calling for an Uber with shaking hands. Bradley, I need a ride, she said into her phone. His response was audible to everyone nearby. I can't, Mom. I need to figure out my own situation. The son she'd promised millions wouldn't even drive her home. Jessica didn't answer at all. She was too busy deleting years of lifestyle posts built on stolen money. By the time Margaret reached the house, neighbors were already whispering. Someone had live-streamed the confrontation at Morrison's office. The country club friends who'd praised her business acumen were group texting about the scandal. The charity boards she'd joined for status were scheduling emergency meetings about her removal. Her lawyer friend Richard, who'd always flirted at parties, wouldn't take her call. Your prenup is ironclad, Margaret, his secretary informed her. Mr. Harrison suggests you seek other counsel. Even her allies distanced themselves from the radioactive fallout of her exposure. The moving company arrived the next morning with boxes and a 30-day notice. Margaret stood in the foyer of the house she'd redecorated 3 times with my father's money, watching strangers catalog items that belonged to the trust. The paintings she'd bought, the furniture she'd selected, all of it purchased with funds that were never truly hers. Your personal items from before the marriage will be packed separately, the supervisor informed her professionally. Those items filled exactly 3 boxes. 8 years of luxury reduced to 3 boxes of premarital possessions. The same reduction she'd tried to force on me, daughter to nothing, reversed completely. The hospital investigation began within 48 hours. Their legal department had questions about visitor restrictions and medical proxy changes that occurred while my father was heavily sedated. The forged signatures Margaret had used to bar me from his room constituted fraud and potentially elder abuse. The head of patient advocacy called me personally to apologize. Your father asked for you repeatedly in his final hours, she confirmed, reading from the nurse's notes. The staff was troubled by the restrictions but felt bound by the paperwork. Each word validated what I'd suspected. My father had wanted me there, had called for me while Margaret played gatekeeper to his death. I chose not to pursue criminal charges, despite Morrison's encouragement. I want accountability, not a circus, I told him. The media had already picked up the story. Stepmother blocks daughter from dying father, loses everything. But I declined every interview request. This wasn't entertainment. It was my father's life, my loss, my truth. Margaret faced consequences anyway. The hospital banned her from their premises. Her employer launched an internal investigation after learning about the fraud. She'd used company resources to research forging documents. Within 2 weeks, she was terminated for ethics violations. The dominoes fell steadily, naturally, without my intervention. Bradley's firm suggested a transfer to their Dallas office, a lateral move that everyone recognized as exile. His reputation as a rising star dimmed once colleagues learned about his eager participation in defrauding his stepfather's daughter. Jessica's law school application was quietly withdrawn after the admissions board raised questions about her character. The truth had its own momentum. I didn't need to push. I just needed to stand back and let consequences flow from actions, exactly as my father had predicted they would. Within 3 weeks, Margaret's carefully constructed social empire collapsed entirely. The country club revoked her membership after reviewing her financial situation. The charity boards she'd joined for prestige quietly requested her resignation. The women who'd lunched with her every Wednesday suddenly had scheduling conflicts. Social exile, swift and complete. My father's business partners reached out with stories Margaret had hidden. Robert talked about you constantly, his CFO told me. He kept a photo of you with the kids from your therapy center on his desk. Margaret would turn it face down during meetings, but he'd always set it right back up. They donated generously to the foundation, honoring the man they'd actually known versus Margaret's fabrication. Bradley's transfer to Dallas became permanent. His Instagram, once filled with Manhattan power lunches and investment banking glamour, went dark. A colleague told me he'd been assigned to back-office operations. No client contact, no commission opportunities. The golden boy who'd called my father Dad while scheming against me was learning what actual work meant. Jessica's influencer career evaporated overnight. Brands dropped their partnerships. Her followers, who'd enjoyed her luxury lifestyle content, turned vicious when they learned it was built on a dying man's stolen money. She deleted all her accounts and enrolled in community college, paid for with her own retail job earnings, not trust funds. The ripple effects reached people I hadn't expected. 3 other families came forward with similar stories about Margaret from her previous job. Elderly clients whose children had been mysteriously excluded from meetings. A pattern emerged that vindicated my father's precautions. He hadn't just protected me, he'd stopped her from doing this to anyone else. My father's friends formed a protective circle around me, the support system Margaret had tried to sever. His legacy lived not in her manipulations, but in their memories. The house felt different without Margaret's presence poisoning it. I walked through rooms I'd been subtly unwelcome in for years, discovering pieces of my father she'd hidden. In his study, behind tax documents, I found letters he'd written to me, but never sent, dated during his illness, when Margaret controlled his communications. My dearest Olivia, one began, if you're reading this, then Morrison did his job. I'm sorry I couldn't fight her more openly. Every time I tried, she threatened to use my illness to declare me incompetent. So I fought quietly, documenting everything, preparing for this moment. His handwriting, shaky from medication but determined, filled pages with love and strategy. In his closet, I found the album Margaret had hidden, photos of my mother, of me growing up, of every art show and graduation she'd claimed he was too busy to attend. He'd been there, in the background, taking pictures Margaret never knew existed. On the back of one from my therapy center's opening, proudest day of my life. The most precious discovery was a voice recorder in his bedside drawer. Hours of messages meant for me, recorded during his final months. Olivia, it's Tuesday, 3 a.m. Margaret's asleep. I wanted to tell you about the time you painted that butterfly at age 4. His voice, weak but warm, sharing memories Margaret couldn't steal. I started therapy myself, real therapy, not the performance of strength I'd maintained for so long. The therapist helped me understand that my father's inability to protect me openly wasn't weakness, but strategy. He'd played a longer game, ensuring permanent protection rather than temporary intervention. Grief and relief tangled together as I healed. I'd lost my father twice, once to Margaret's manipulations, then to death. But I'd found him again in these hidden treasures, his love preserved in paper and voice. My father's siblings emerged from 5 years of Margaret-imposed silence. She told us you didn't want contact, Aunt Patricia explained, crying as she hugged me. Said you were embarrassed by our working-class background now that Robert had money. The lie stung with its calculated cruelty. Margaret had weaponized my father's humble origins against his own family. Uncle James revealed attempted visits Margaret had blocked. We came for Thanksgiving 2 years ago. She met us in the driveway, said Robert was too ill and you were too busy with your important artist friends to see us. They'd driven 4 hours only to be turned away at the gate of the house where they'd once been welcome. My grandmother's best friend, Dorothy, now 91, called from Florida. Your father phoned me every Sunday until Margaret changed his number. He worried about you constantly, sweet girl. Said Margaret was poisoning you against him slowly. The calls I'd never received, the relationship severed, all part of Margaret's isolation campaign. We organized a proper memorial for my father. 200 people came. His real friends, employees who'd respected him, families whose children I'd helped through therapy. This time, the slideshow included everyone, his siblings, my mother, me at every age. The eulogy came from Uncle James, who'd known him since childhood, not from Bradley's performed grief. Jessica sent a letter through Morrison's office. I'm sorry, filled 2 pages, along with admissions about her mother's schemes she'd witnessed. I didn't respond, but I didn't burn it either. Bradley sent nothing, his silence its own form of acknowledgement. Some bridges, once burned, couldn't be rebuilt with apologies. The family Margaret had tried to erase surrounded me with love my father would have wanted me to feel. His death had broken her spell over all of us. 6 months after the will reading, I'd learned to set boundaries with the grace my father had shown in his final plans. When Margaret sent a letter through her new lawyer requesting consideration of circumstances, I responded through Morrison. I wish you healing, but I won't be part of your journey. Forgiveness didn't mean access to my life. Bradley reached out once, a carefully worded email about moving forward and learning from mistakes. I acknowledged it with 2 sentences. Thank you for writing. I hope you find peace. No door opened, no invitation extended. His choices had consequences that apologies couldn't erase. The hardest boundary was with well-meaning people who thought I should be the bigger person and reconcile. She's lost everything, a distant cousin argued. Isn't that punishment enough? But boundaries weren't about punishment. They were about protection. My father had taught me that through his trust amendment. Some people, once they'd shown you who they were, shouldn't get second chances to hurt you. I returned to dating after 2 years of solitude, but with new awareness. Red flags I might have ignored before, someone dismissive of my career, anyone who joked about my inheritance, people who pushed against clearly stated boundaries, became immediate deal-breakers. My father's money hadn't made me suspicious. Margaret's betrayal had made me wise. The therapy center created a program specifically for children dealing with family betrayal and grief. We called it the Butterfly Project, transformation through art. Every child who learned to express their pain through creation instead of destruction was a victory my father would have celebrated. Your boundaries are your inheritance too, my therapist observed. Your father didn't just leave you money, He left you permission to protect yourself. She was right. The trust fund was valuable, but the trust in my own judgment was priceless. The Robert Davidson Foundation helped 500 children in its first year. Each child who learned to paint their trauma instead of carrying it silently was my father's legacy breathing in the world. The second therapy center opened in the neighborhood where my father grew up, bringing healing full circle to the community that had shaped him. I wrote a book called When Love Means Letting Go, about setting boundaries with family members who harm us. It wasn't about Margaret specifically, but about the patterns that allow manipulation to flourish in families. The dedication read, "For my father, who loved me enough to protect me even from beyond." Speaking engagements followed, though I chose them carefully. I talked about grief complicated by betrayal, about loving someone who couldn't protect you openly, about finding strength in quiet resistance. Women approached me afterward with their own stories: stepchildren erased, inheritances stolen, final goodbyes denied. We were a silent sisterhood of the deliberately forgotten. The most precious discovery came while organizing foundation papers. In a misfiled folder, Morrison's assistant found one last video from my father, recorded just weeks before his death. He was thin, clearly dying, but his eyes were bright with love. "Olivia, if you're watching this, you've won. Not the money. That was never the real prize. You've won your freedom from her poison. You've won the right to live without apology. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. So very proud." I played it only once, then locked it away. Some gifts are too precious for repeated viewing. My father's love lived in the foundation, in the children we helped, in the boundaries I maintained. His money built buildings, but his faith in me built my strength. That was his true inheritance, not the millions, but the certainty that I was worth protecting. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money. It's the knowledge that someone loved you enough to protect you even from beyond. If you've ever had to stand firm against family manipulation or set boundaries with those who should have protected you, remember, your worth isn't determined by their validation. Share your own story of quiet strength in the comments. What boundaries have you had to set to protect your peace? Thank you for listening to my story.